My guest tonight is Senator Richard Black from Virginia. Like Congressman Tulsi Gabbard, he's also been to Syria and has spoken personally with President Bashar al-Assad. And also, like Congressman Gabbard, he believes that Syrian rebels are responsible for the recent chemical weapons attack in Syria. Now, Senator, while you and I are talking, I'm going to be showing my viewers some video of al-Nusra terrorists mixing, testing, and deploying chemical weapons. But that's not really a surprise to you, is it?
Yeah, I'm not surprised. You know, it was very widely reported there's a major CNN report that's easy to come up with online, and it talks about a major U.S. airstrike using B-52 bombers against an ISIS poison gas factory in Mosul. Now, of course, you don't just produce the gas and keep it in tanks. What you do is you put it in artillery shells and anti-tank mines and things of that sort. And so we know for a fact that they have gas. Back in 2013, the Defense Intelligence Agency, just before the Damascus gas attack, reported that al-Qaeda had a major sarin gas capability, and so it goes way back. And the problem is that we have a CIA and a State Department that are they have objectives in mind, and they just put out whatever propaganda they can, and it's a huge amount because they've got an unlimited budget, and it's just ordinary citizens who are able to use social media and that sort of thing to try to get the truth out. But yesterday the White House felt compelled to come out and address my comments. And they put Sebastian Gorka on, and he just sort of went all around. He never did get to the basic issue of what would be the motive for Syria to use poison gas, knowing they'd enrage the world. And if they were going to use poison gas, why wouldn't they use it against a military target instead of just a gaggle of civilians walking down the street? So. I'm not at all surprised that you've got clear evidence of them doing this. There's been lots of evidence of it, and I think our reaction guarantees that there will be another sarin gas release, and it'll be blamed again on Syria. There's nothing Syria can do, because the media they've got their stories already printed, pinning it on Syria, and the terrorists are just gleeful about this. It's like they can make us do whatever they want. And the only reason they can is because the media is complicit in it.
That and the fact that they were trained by the CIA. Did you know that that there are CIA-funded rebels that are fighting Pentagon-funded rebels in Syria?
Oh, it's just we have a diplomatic mission. When we closed down the Syrian embassy, we did that just before Syria conducted its presidential elections, because we didn't want to have a serious black eye by having Syrian Americans vote overwhelmingly for President Assad. And we replaced the Syrian embassy with a diplomatic mission, and it's called something like the Syrian Revolutionary Armed Front or whatever. But basically, it is a mission whose diplomatic purpose is to lobby Congress for weapons to be used by ISIS and al-Qaeda and all the other terrorist organizations over there.
Would this footage that I have be useful to you? You've got a much larger voice and a much larger reach than I do, and I'm desperately trying to prevent an unnecessary war with Russia, especially when it's based on faulty or misleading intelligence.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, now we're starting to blame Russia for the sarin gas attack. I just ran across a couple of things, and I mean, the absurdity. It doesn't matter how absurd the claim is, as long as all the media are in lockstep and say what they're told to say. They could say that we've just discovered that men from the backside of the moon have invaded the planet, and if every news station published it as a fact, everybody on the street would agree. They'd say, "Yeah, boy, those men from the moon have they're all over the place. I mean, everybody says so. All the experts tell us it's true." But I'd encourage you to, use your network of emails or however you communicate and get the word out about this. The key thing, and the one thing that has the other side stumped, is that they cannot articulate a motive why Syria, which is winning on every front, would suddenly deliberately incur the wrath of the world by using sarin gas in a small attack, and use it against civilians instead of the armored formations and the massive defensive fortifications of the terrorists. There's no rational reason for it. And then I had one guy say, "Oh well, isn't he a tyrant? And don't tyrants do crazy things?" Well, I mean that's just a stupid answer. If you look at the many videos of President Assad, he is exactly the way he was when I met with him in his office. He is a soft-spoken, very thoughtful, extremely intelligent, rather gentle man. And his wife is very much the same. She's a little more charismatic. But in 6 years of war, we have not been able to come up with one puppet leader who's popular with the Syrian people. The Syrian, often the media says, "Oh, well, look at this. Assad only controls so much of the country." Well, the fact is, I've been in Syria and I've driven out in ISIS-held territory, and the vast bulk of Syria is rocky desert. It's not sand dunes, but it's rock, and it's basically uninhabited. There may be one family per square mile in some areas, but when you talk about the inhabited portions, 80% of the Syrian people are under government control and protection, and of the other 20%, the ones that are under the terrorist rule, 2/3 of those wish that they could get over to the government side, and they just can't.
Well, Senator, whether Assad launched that strike or not, he's been vilified by the entire world, which actually I think was the very purpose of this false flag. And at some point, he's going to have to go. But for the time being, don't you think that defeating ISIS should be the first order of business? If the U.S., Russia, and Assad coordinated their efforts, ISIS would be toast in very short order.
Well, I don't think President Assad is the problem. Here's the thing. He is essentially the glue that holds Syria together. The reason that from the very beginning they have tried to get him out of office is because they know that he has the love and affection of the Syrian people. The only people who say Assad must go are foreigners. They're not Syrians. Now you've got some of the jihadists, the beheaders and the crucifiers and the people that rape 6-year-old girls, and they say Assad has to go. But when you talk about the man in the street, the ordinary, everyday Syrian, they love President Assad and his wife. And I think they generally understand that if he goes, he's going to be replaced by a puppet regime installed probably by Saudi Arabia. It'll be a vicious Islamic state under Sharia law, and they're going to start executing hundreds of thousands of Christians and Alawites who are known as the Friends of the Christians. They want to get rid of him because they want to install al-Qaeda.
Well, that's been my position for years, that this whole Arab Spring was nothing but a plan by the globalists to surround Israel with hostile Islamist regimes headed by the Muslim Brotherhood, which we know is the political counterpart to al-Qaeda.
You're right on track, and this idea that somehow you would be amazed. I went to visit Assad, and it was easier for me to go in and visit with him than it was for me to go through the airport or probably even to go into the county library.
Do you have any plans to go back to Syria in the near future? Because I'd love to tag along.
I'm almost sure that I will, unless we install a jihadist government.
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, I feel safer there than I would if I went to Saudi Arabia or Turkey, because I think I'd be assassinated if I went to one of those countries. But it is amazing. Do you know Bashar al-Assad drives himself? His wife walks her children to a public school there. When they took over, when he became the president, people were quite startled because instead of moving into some presidential residence, they rented an apartment, and everybody. I know a doctor who was living there, and he said, "Gosh, the chatter everywhere was, do you know who just moved in? Yeah, the guy 3 doors down is the president of Syria." They just live like ordinary people. They're not ostentatious. Asma Assad, who was raised in England, she has Syrian heritage. She doesn't wear any jewelry. Nothing. She's extremely charismatic, and it's hard to explain. She just something about her personality is just, she has such tremendous. Both of them are enormously intelligent, and they're both totally devoted to Syria. And I'm sure when we put out the word that so-and-so must go, that's a death sentence. And either you jump on a plane and leave, or we kill you, we kill your wife, we kill your brothers, your sons, your children. This is just the way we do things. That's the way the CIA and the State Department have operated.
Now, would you blame that on the Obama-Clinton State Department? Or is this more of a deep state thing where the globalist agenda is going to be pushed forward regardless of who's in charge of the State Department and the executive branch?
I guess there are two answers. I would attribute it to the deep state, which goes on, generation after generation.
Right.
But I think it has become far more deadly and dangerous during the time. First, starting with George Bush, Dick Cheney, and then with Hillary Clinton. She sort of put it on overdrive. Obama put Muslim Brotherhood operatives all through the intelligence network and the national security network. So it's totally compromised at this point, and has virtually no loyalty to the United States. Their loyalty is to the global billionaires of the world who
You mean like George Soros?
Yes, Soros, and there are probably somewhere around 100 guys who basically control the wealth of the world, and they direct things. But I can think when I was a little boy in elementary school, I was attending school in Coral Gables, Florida. Even then, we would talk about the Spanish-American War and how when the battleship Maine was sunk, that was not the Spaniards who did it. It was a false flag attack, and it was an excuse for us to overthrow the Spanish Empire and occupy the Philippines and Cuba, and frankly, I think no good came of any of it for us. But it's been going on. I mean, the purpose of one. Well, I mean, they have many purposes, but one purpose of the CIA and State Department, which really are integral, but one is part of the other, and one of their purposes is to create pretext for war. Wars don't just suddenly break out because some incident occurs. They're planned. You can go on the internet quite easily, and if you look up, if you Google General Wesley Clark.
Right. Actually, I just happen to have that video handy. So give me just a second here. And, why don't we all take a look at this real quick. And this is General Wesley Clark describing a Pentagon plan to invade 7 countries in 5 years.
I went downstairs. I was leaving the Pentagon, and an officer from the Joint Staff called me into his office and said, I want you to know, he said, sir, we're going to attack Iraq. And I said, why? He said, we don't know. He said, I said, well, did they tie Saddam to 9/11? He said, no. He said, but I guess they don't know what to do about terrorism, and so they think, but they can attack states, and they want to look strong, and so I guess they think if they take down a state, it will intimidate the terrorists. And it's like that old saying, he said, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem has to be a nail. Well, I walked out of there pretty upset, and then we attacked Afghanistan. I was pretty happy about that. We should have. And then I came back to the Pentagon about 6 weeks later. I saw the same officer. I said, why haven't we attacked Iraq? We still going to attack Iraq? He said, oh, sir. He says, it's worse than that. He said, he pulled up a piece of paper off his desk. He said, I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office that says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. I said, 7 countries in 5 years. I said, is that a classified memo? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me. He was about to show it to me. He said, because I want to talk about it.
The one thing that all of those countries had in common was the fact that none of them had a central bank.
Yes, well, the bank people. If you look now, Libya. There were 2 reasons for invading Libya. One is that Libya had just established a hard African currency backed by gold.
The dinar, yes.
Yes, and this was a tremendous threat to the Western world because we're bankrupt. We just simply print money that has no meaning, and it works so long as there is not an alternative to go to, and the very genuine and legitimate concern of the banking elite was that if people began to compare and say, okay, with this currency you can exchange for gold, this currency you can use to light your cigars with or whatever you want, but you can't do anything else with it. People would say, you know what, I think I want to have hard currency. And so that, Libya had to fall because of that. The other thing, though, is that we had to get into Libya in order to plunder their weapons and use them to overthrow Syria.
Senator, you've basically just confirmed everything that I've reported about Libya and the Middle East for the last 4 years. In fact, I think that's what got Ambassador Stevens killed, was that he was running guns and fighters from Libya to Syria through Turkey. And Fox News famously exposed this several years ago.
There's been a lot of discussion about what our operatives were doing there at the time when this attack happened, and that there was discussion about moving weapons out of that very volatile area in Libya. What do we learn about that in here, Catherine?
Well, Martha, another DIA memo dated October 5th, 2012, leaves no doubt that U.S. intelligence agencies were clearly aware that lethal weapons were being shipped to Syria via the port of Benghazi. In a recent interview with Bret Baier, the former acting CIA director skirted the topic.
Were CIA officers tracking the movement of weapons from Libya to Syria?
Can't talk about that.
Can't talk about it.
Can't talk about it.
You know, Senator, I'm fully convinced that Hillary Clinton was having Ambassador Stevens and the CIA run guns and personnel to Syria in furtherance of a criminal conspiracy to topple Arab leaders across the Middle East. What do you think about that, Senator? Was Ambassador Stevens running guns to jihadists?
Well, what happened? He had moved 20,000 anti-aircraft missiles into Libya during the uprising, which we staged. The CIA created it, and then we were concerned. We wanted to recover them afterwards, and he held a meeting with I'm not sure what level he was, but he was a Turkish official, and he held the meeting at that residence where he was killed. He tried to buy back the missiles, and the Turks said, "No deal. The Turks knew where they were. They didn't have them all in a warehouse, but they knew where all of them were located, and so they were sort of the central source for recovering them." And the Turks blew us off, and then I actually have a contact who knows the man who lived in the house across from there, and in order not to be killed himself or something, he went out and sort of accompanied the jihadists as they went in, and he was actually there. He saw Chris Stevens' body dragged out of the room, and interestingly, that particular place had an emergency escape route built into it, and it's one of these doors. You open it up, there's a slide, you slide down the slide into an armored car, and the armored car takes off, and you escape. There were 6 Caucasian men who slid down there and escaped, and left left Stevens in there. And now normally he would be the first to go, but the speculation is that that he was deliberately killed on orders of Hillary because she just did not want to have fingerprints, and he had been her personal emissary to the revolution, so he knew where all the skeletons were buried, and
Right.
Best to simply have him gone, and he'd take to the grave all of the dirt that he'd been involved in. But listen, I've got to run. I thank you very much for what you're doing. Get the word out as much as you can. I don't know whether we can stop this thing, but we need to try.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And thank you for being on The Truth is Viral. And God bless you, Senator, for speaking out on this. And that's something we can all do, folks. It's something that we all must do. We got to get this information to Donald Trump. You know how he loves Twitter, so make sure that you tweet this to him. Put it on his Facebook page. He's got to have alternative facts so that he can make an informed decision, because I'm afraid that the deep state and the mainstream media is filling his head with a bunch of garbage. President Trump, God love him, he's not a foreign policy expert. He said, hire people that know what they're doing and let them do their job. But he also said, don't trust them. You got to constantly keep an eye on these people, and President Trump especially, because he knows he's got enemies in the intelligence services. He knows that he's got enemies even in the Republican Party, like songbird John McCain and Lindsey Graham. Whenever the mainstream media wants to trot out a Republican senator or Republican mouthpiece, that's who they trot out, is John McCain and Lindsey Graham, and we all know that they're globalists and that they're up to no good. Jonathan McCain was actually in Syria meeting with terrorists. Again, this was backed up by a report on Fox News. This is Eric Bolling.
Yeah.
We're now seeing pictures of Abrams tanks and Humvees with ISIS fighters in them.
Why is that, Eric?
Why is that? Because
Why is
Iraqi
that,
soldiers have laid down their arms. Because the Syrian rebels that we armed, who were supposed to help us, are the same people who've turned around and decided they want Iraq as well.
And that ties right back into not having an appropriate status of forces agreement to secure the region.
Hold on. We have pictures of United States senators with terrorists that we won't run here, but it'll run on other magazines, it'll run in other areas, but we won't run it on this show. He's standing with terrorists. Listen, all I'm saying is we don't know who our friends are. We don't know who we're arming. We don't know who we're giving money to. We don't know who we're training.
So yeah, folks, the mainstream media has had this information all along. They just like to bury it when their narrative changes, and we can't allow that to happen. We've got to get this information to Donald Trump so he sees it. So tweet it, put it on his Facebook page, and you become part of the resistance, the real resistance against the deep state.
Thank you for watching The Truth is Viral with your host, Bobby Powell. Make sure to follow The Apocalypse on Twitter @The Truth is Viral. Like The Truth is Viral on Facebook, and if you can, please remember to donate to the cause via PayPal at www.bobpowell.blogspot.com.